But goalkeeping is such a mental strain and such a mental grind that if you're a kid that's in goalkeeping, being aware of those different things that are your triggers, or like being aware of those different things that motivate you in certain situations, and, how to deal with different things that involve being a goalkeeper in terms of the mental struggles of it and everything that goes into that. If you are aware of that and can focus on that and spend time devoting yourself to making sure that your mentals are in the right space when playing this position, that'll take you farther than any goalkeeper training that you might pay extra for because he was some professional.
Step into the world of FC Game Changer, the football club that will change your game. We want to help boost your mindset, strength, and nutrition. A potent trio capable of completely transforming both your football performance and your overall life.
The way we play it, the way we say it.
With a new expert every month, including strength coaches, nutritionists, football coaches, former and current footballers. We are dedicated to sharing knowledge and skills for the next generation of footballers, allowing you to become the best footballer you can be. Thanks for joining us today. Now, let the game begin.
Jeff Attinella, welcome to the show.
I appreciate you having me on, man. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited because we've had one coach. He's a goalkeeper coach, and he's been with us. He's been on the podcast for it was about a year ago he was on, and that was the first and only like goalkeeper talk that we've had here in the platform. And most of the, not most, but a good amount of the people that follow us, our audience, most of them are goalkeepers and parents of goalkeepers, young goalkeepers. So I think this is going to be great.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a market that, like you said, you've had one goalkeeper coach on, and it's a market that a lot of people are interested in learning about. And, it's definitely one of those things that not every club and not every place at the time to invest in goalkeepers. So the more knowledge that we can share, and especially for the parents that are going through it, the more knowledge we can share and try to provide for people, the better we can do with the world. So I'm here, brother. Let's get into it.
100%. And before we jump into this here, I just want to mention that the goalkeeper, you guys are so underrated, because
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you do, it's an extremely important position, right? More than what people think. But before we get into all of those things, for the audience that might not know you, tell us your story and who is Jeff Attinella?
Well, I'm a father and a husband, but from a soccer standpoint, I grew up down here in Tampa, Florida. Went to the University of South Florida, where I was named an All-American. And then after I went to USF, I signed with the Tampa Bay Rowdies, the hometown team down here. Did 2 years with the Rowdies. We were fortunate enough to win the championship my second year. And then from the Tampa Bay Rowdies, I signed with Real Salt Lake, where I spent 4 years of my career. And then finally ending my career after 5 seasons with the Portland Timbers. So spent 11 years playing professionally, won an NASL championship with the Rowdies. We went 0-3 in MLS Cups, but 3 Western Conference championships throughout my MLS career. And so now I'm retired and down here in Tampa doing a couple different things. I work with a family business, but I also spend a lot of time, with my own goalkeeper academy, the Tampa Bay Goalkeeper Academy, and a couple different organizations that I'm sure I'll shout out later. But, very heavily involved in the soccer world still, very heavily involved in goalkeeping and goalkeeper education, and trying to give back from my experiences is really what I'm all about when it comes to soccer.
Awesome. That's a quite extensive resume right there, and I think this is going to be good for, the younger audience as well to see, we're going to go through, your entire career, basically, kind of, let's get into details of that. When did soccer start for you?
So I started playing when I was 7. So like most kids, I started playing when I was very young. Immediately went into goalkeeping.
I was going to ask you that.
Once we got past rec soccer, we were, I remember it, you have some memories when you were younger. I remember it from, when I was in U9s at the time it was. The head coach just asked, who thinks they could play goalie? We don't have a goalie. And I raised my hand because I said, well, I play baseball, so I think, I could probably do the same thing. And then from there, man, it just stuck. And he never let me out of the goal again. He said, "You're a goalie." I could see it. And I never got out of the goal again.
That's awesome. You mentioned something here, baseball. So you were already playing baseball. So you had that foundation, eye-hand coordination.
Yeah, I was a big sports guy, so still am. I mean, I played every other sport growing up as well, with soccer. And I think that playing other sports is huge for a goalkeeper because it's a way to practice those motor skills and those different development skills with not necessarily having to be on the soccer field all the time. So it's a good way to get those bases down while also not having to deal with like the burnout that a lot of people talk about. So yeah, I was a sports junkie, man. Still am.
That's cool. I mean, it's funny because it depends on the person that you talk to. A lot of people, they say, yeah, this is good for, the youth athletes to play, several sports. But other people, they tend to say, but then you never specialize and get extremely good at one. What's your opinion on that?
I think it's all based off of the user. I think that it depends on kid to kid. I think that everybody knows their own kids well enough where, if you have a kid who is very fixated and really enjoys playing soccer and that's the sport that he really wants to dive into, I don't really see any issues with singular focus and really hammering down the attention on that one sport. But at me as a parent, until my kids show that they're really interested in one specific thing, I'm going to try to just introduce them to everything that I can and see what they like, see what sticks. So I think that there's obviously two different ways to go about it. But I think you really got to know your child and know what they're telling you and listen to what they're telling you, because maybe they do excel at soccer, but if you get the sense that they're burning out a little bit, it's okay to hit the brakes, maybe take a season off to try something different. And then, if they really love the sport and they're really passionate about it, they'll gravitate back to it naturally without feeling like it's so forced.
That's a good point. We just had a little kid. We just had a kid as well. He's 10 months old now. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a journey, and I'm already kind of thinking, and some of these questions are kind of selfish of me to kind of learn and see how I'm gonna guide him through a sports, because I do want him to be involved with sports. But like you said, it depends on the person, on the kid, and I think it's a good thing, because I come from Brazil. In Brazil, you don't have that choice, right? In the US, it's a great system. You can expose your child to several sports, different seasons. They can be occupied playing for the entire year, basically. In Brazil, you just don't have the choice. So that's why we only play soccer. That's all we do from young age all the way to professional level. And
that's a lot of layers there too, right? If you want to dive into a full different conversation, there's so many options of different things to do here in this country that it makes it hard for soccer to elevate itself, because you don't get that same attention to the sport because kids can do so many different things, so it's a very layered issue, of course, and I'm sure that's an entirely different podcast that could be had with a lot of different times. But that's a big part of the issue with soccer as well, is there's so many different options. So how do you get one of the kids that might have that skill to become the next, big time player to focus on the one sport?
That's so true. It's
very different. It's very different here in America, especially for soccer.
Yeah, we should do like a part 2 and kind of peel that off, because I think it is an issue, but I do love that system. It's kind of like, I think at the end of the day, at the end of the day, it should be what's best for the kids' development, and you're exposing them to several different sports. But yeah, and in Brazil, it's funny because we don't have the infrastructure, right? So you always start at futsal because you don't have the fields, you don't have the facilities. So then as you grow up, that's how you start playing. You transition from futsal to soccer outside. So yeah, that's a separate conversation. We can do like a part 2 with you, and we can kind of peel that off as well.
Yeah, there's lots of layers of that one.
It's complicated, but I do think though the US at some point will become a powerhouse. I do believe that, because the infrastructure that we have here, the easy access to the technology, to like middle schools here, they have facilities that in Brazil you only find at the professional level. So I really think that at some point things are going to change.
We could dive into that on the next one.
Yeah.
I can keep asking you questions about that to make you think a little bit more, but we'll dive in for the next one.
Okay, now let's do a part 2 then.
Goalkeeping. They could be a whole tangent about that.
For everyone watching, listening, we might have a part 2 with Jeff here, so stay tuned for that one. But
yeah, I have thoughts, but we'll stay focused.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, goalkeeper, cool. So 7 years old, and when did that click for you that you could reach the professional level, or you never thought that far ahead? You just wanted to, train at that level, maybe go to a high school and then eventually go to college. And then maybe if that works out, I become a professional goalkeeper.
My goal was always to make it to college. So once, and of course, you have to go through some years. I'm not talking about when I was a very young person. At the time when I was really young, you're playing to have fun, you're playing with your friends, and you start realizing that you're actually pretty decent at it. And then, so for me, it was always a step-by-step process. When I was getting close to high school, my goal was to be the starter for the high school team. And then when I was in high school and I started separating myself a little bit, the goal was, okay, if I can get a college scholarship and get my education paid for, it would almost in a way feel like it was all worth it, because you'll go through this as a parent. The parenting sacrifice for what it takes to be involved in youth sports is massive. I mean, I'm going through it just a little bit right now, and I'm only talking about, rec league softball, and it's a pretty serious commitment. So when you really think about the time that it takes for parents to invest in their kids growing up in the youth sports system and to really commit to it, in my mind, I always thought that if I could get a college education out of this sport and relieve my parents of feeling like they have the pressure of making sure that that gets done, then I did what I needed to do to kind of live up to my side of this arrangement that we never talked about, but that was currently in place,
Right.
And then once I got to college, I wasn't heavily recruited by the bigger schools. It was more, couple small schools and the local school USF, which at the time was in the Big East, and they were a big time program. And then once I had the opportunity to go there, that kind of made its mind up on its own, because I always wanted to play for a big time program, and it had nothing to do with being close to home, but that was the biggest one that I was being recruited by. And to be honest, I didn't think about playing professionally until after my junior season. I won the starting job my sophomore year. I was still focused on getting an education and just thought it was cool to be part of the team. Once I started playing though consistently and getting the starting job, my junior year, I was fortunate enough to be named first team All-American.
Amazing.
And that was the first time that I really even noticed that people were recognizing that I was putting together a pretty good season and that I was a pretty good college goalkeeper. I kind of had my head in the sand to all that stuff, which, to be honest, was kind of a peaceful place for me. Like once I found out that people were looking at me in a different light, it changed my perspective on it quite a bit. But, it really wasn't until after my junior year where people started telling me, we need to get you graduated because you're going to get drafted, that I was like, okay, I guess I'll change my major around and really focus on, playing professional soccer, which wasn't a high focus of mine. So it really wasn't until the later stages of college that I committed to it and decided that that was the path that, I was going to be on.
Wow, that's interesting. I like that approach too. Like you took it, step by step, and you started kind of realizing that, maybe going professional could be possible. But for the young athletes here, for the goalkeepers watching and listening, what's that process like? From young age to going to high school to then, being recruited to play for a college, program, and then eventually get to the professional level. Can you kind of in detail explain how that process was, at least for you, so they can kind of understand a little bit better?
Yeah, I think for me, everything was very step by step. And then every single time that you elevated to the next level, for me, it was you're playing club soccer. And then the next thing you know, you're playing high school. And at the time, high school, there were still a lot of really good players that were playing high school soccer. I know that that's changed now with the new system and everything. But, you're a 15-year-old playing against 18-year-olds that are going to D1 colleges the next year. for me, every single time that I elevated myself in my career, there was a huge learning process and a huge learning curve of getting myself caught up to speed and being comfortable and being okay with that, and recognizing that it's going to take a little bit of time, but you need to put in a little bit of extra work to make sure that you get yourself caught up to speed if you want to be playing in games. You know, there's always other goalkeepers on the roster that are probably capable of taking the job or doing the position that you want to be playing. So every time that I elevated, it was just a reminder of I need to catch up to speed as fast as I can. And the best way to do that is by one, training extra on your own, but also kind of going through the process of playing in these games and adapting and learning on the fly to the speed of the game and the different things that are going on, so that you start to feel more and more comfortable with the reps that you get. I think that the hard part for goalkeepers, especially young goalkeepers that are growing up, is nowadays there's 2 or 3 goalkeepers on a roster and you're playing spotty starts, maybe you're splitting halves. There's not really a good system in place because everybody wants to play for the top level MLS next teams, and nobody wants to, go down to the lower level and get all the games because they think that they're not getting showcased. But I would argue that if you're going through a development process, especially as a goalkeeper, finding a way to get yourself on the field and get meaningful minutes and get games, whether it's, splitting time with the first team and the second team, or just doing anything that you can to get that game experience, will take you so far. Eventually you get to a point where you know that you have to be on the first team to accomplish your goals. But especially if you're young, I just wouldn't get fixated on those types of things, because there's an opportunity to get games at other levels where it might be better for you to get that type of experience. And so for me, throughout the entire course of my career, every time that there was an elevation, whether it was from college to pros, from, the Rowdies to MLS, from being a bench player to a starter, it's all about how you, one, prepare for that moment and making sure that you're ready to go in that moment. But also recognizing that when you do step up, the pace of the game is going to be different. The level of players are going to be different. So the way that you play the position might have to be a little bit different. And you might have to figure out how you're going to adjust to the elevation of that process. And then you have to adapt it to your game so that you can fit in as quickly as possible. I'm not sure if that totally answers your question.
No, that does. There's so many things here for us to... Yeah, there's so many things here.
I went through what I recognized throughout my career, and you're always trying to progress and always trying to elevate. But especially as goalkeepers, if you're going to elevate, you got to make sure that you're caught up to speed with what's going on around you, because every time you elevate, everything happens a little bit quicker, and the crosses are a little bit better. The shots are a little bit more to the corner. You know what I mean? Everything does get a little bit better in terms of what you're dealing with. So you have to be able to elevate with it and understand that there's a learning time that it'll take to do that.
100%. No, there's so many things for us to unpack just in everything that you just said right now. One thing that you said that I really liked is you shouldn't care about, what level you are, as long as if you're playing, if you're getting playing time, you're practicing, you're training, you're staying, up to speed. Even though
that changes at a certain age, that definitely changes at a certain age. But when you're young, and if it's youth soccer and you're not, being scouted by these academies and you're just trying to get games, don't be afraid to go get games.
Yeah.
No one's going to care if you go and get games.
How did you stay, mentally, focused in those times? What is it the way you grew up? Your parents kind of taught you that kind of strong mentality? How did that come about for you?
I think for me, I was always kind of motivated, and I'm not saying this is the right motivation because it's done me wrong a couple of times too, but I was always motivated by the fact of people, overlooking me. So there were a lot of moments growing up where, I didn't make the region ODP team and they took some other goalies over me. And I think I was 10. And, I told myself, I'm never doing ODP again. These guys are overlooking me. I'm never doing this again. I'm going to do it on my own. And I never went back. And, that was a chip that I carried with me for a really long time. And, when I was going to high school, as silly as this sounds now, when I was going to high school, there was this guy that just graduated and everybody was telling me, you'll never be this guy, but you could be good, but you're this guy was the man. And then, so for me, it was okay, well, I got to be better than this guy.
Yeah.
And that just kind of continued throughout the course of my career. And then once I got to the Rowdies, it was, okay, I need to prove that I'm better than playing in this league because I want to be in the MLS. So I'm going to give myself 2 to 3 years to prove that. And if I don't prove it, then, I'm going to try to move on with my life, because I always just had high goals in terms of when I knew that I was going to play professionally. I always just kind of had that chip on my shoulder of, okay, this is where I need to be. And if I'm not here, then I'm kind of wasting my time because I want to, get my life going. So I'm not saying that that's the right way to go about it.
Hey, you worked out for you.
Yeah, it's done me wrong before, but that was always like a big motivating factor for me, was just that constant chip that I felt like I had on my shoulder, that whether it was there or not rightfully, I felt like it was there. So that was the thing that kept motivating me.
Yeah. And again, those are things that worked and maybe did not work for you at certain times. It's good for the audience to listen to that too, because, certain things they could try with themselves might not work. Things that worked for you might not work for me or for someone else. So I think that's good for us to kind of touch on these kind of little details as well, because, the main idea is to give people more tools for them to, keep pursuing their dreams. Whether if it's, just playing high school or playing college soccer or going, play professionally. I think
that if anything, especially for goalkeepers, it's not talked about enough because there's not enough time to talk about it, because coaches, goalkeeper coaches and people that are working with young goalkeepers have so many goalkeepers that it's impossible to really pinpoint a single individual and help them with this. But goalkeeping is such a mental strain and such a mental grind that if you're a kid that's in goalkeeping, being aware of those different things that are your triggers, or being aware of those different things that motivate you in certain situations, and, how to deal with different things that involve being a goalkeeper in terms of the mental struggles of it and everything that goes into that. If you are aware of that and can focus on that and spend time devoting yourself to making sure that your mentals are in the right space when playing this position, that'll take you farther than any goalkeeper training that you might pay extra for because he was some professional.
That's great
the mental
to hear
side
that.
Of goalkeeping, the mental side of goalkeeping is the most important part, because there's a lot of people that can make saves, but if you don't have the right headspace for the position, it's going to eat you alive, truthfully.
Wow,
so that's an important
is
part for people to focus on.
You see, that's so great, that's so great for people to hear. And right now, what can they start doing right now in order to improve that mental strength?
I think for everything, it's all about, and listen, man, mental strength. I'm still working on my own issues, brother. So goalkeeping did a number on me. It does a number on people. It really does. So, but it's a beautiful position if you can conquer that side of it. I think for me, if you're a young goalkeeper, if you're a goalkeeper who's trying to learn to go through this process, you've really got to work on identifying the things that help you either move on from a mistake, compartmentalize different things, or just staying as extremely focused and being where your feet are at all times. Recognize those things. And it's different for everybody. For me, there's people go around and they say all the time, if you're a goalkeeper and you make a mistake, what do you do? And people just say, oh, you just forget about it and move on. And that's just the laziest answer imaginable, because it's impossible. I carry every mistake. I mean, from the time that I was truly, I think 11 to 12 years old, I remember every single bad mistake that I made in the game. Bad mistakes that really, truly cost the team. I remember every single one of them. And that's not saying that, that's something that everybody does, but that's my experience of it. And, so it's not about how quickly can you move on to the mistake and think of the next one. And, you just forget about your mistakes and, don't worry about it. That's a lazy answer, because the mistakes are the ones that stick with you. But for a goalkeeper, you need to figure out, how do I move on from this mistake in this current moment, get through the rest of my game, perform at the high level that I was at before I made the mistake, and then go back and reflect on the mistake and hope that I never do it again. So there's different processes for everybody. For me, that was as simple as, going through some tough times and realizing like what worked for me and what didn't work for me, and trial and error with those different practices and exercises. There's different things that kept me very focused on games that I got help with a sports psychologist with. One of the things was writing reminders on tape on your wrist so that every time you look at it, no matter what's going on, it grounds you. So there's just different strategies. And I think that for goalkeepers, figuring out exactly what puts you in the right headspace before a game and even during a game, it's trial and error. But once you find something that works, stick with it and make it a crucial habit and part of your routine, because you're going to need it throughout the course of your career.
Yeah. Wow. No, it's so tough. Going back to the beginning when I said, that's a very underrated position. Because like you said, let's say I was always a midfielder. So I almost can make mistakes. 1, 2, 3, 10, 15. And that may not cost anything to the team. Right? But for the goalkeeper, one mistake could, it's 1-0. And you could lose the game. And
what game, lose your job. There's a lot.
It goes even deeper. You're right. It goes
lose people's trust. There's a lot.
That seems, and it's funny too. People forget. People forget that throughout that same game, you had like 15 amazing saves that completely saved the game. But then like 89th minute, something happens. You have like, I don't know, your center back did something stupid. No one looks at the center back. And you suffer the goal, and it's like, it's so unfortunate. It's just so unfortunate.
It's a beautiful position in the fact that, it's a position that really truly you put a lot of pressure on yourself to be perfect. It's a position where you feel like you really have to be perfect, or else perfect or lucky, or a combination of both. But that's the position. Because at the end of the day, if you give up a goal, it doesn't matter what the goal was, but you give up a goal, that's not doing your job. And the point of soccer is to score as many goals as possible.
Oh my God.
So it's a very unique position, man.
It really is. I think people need to understand that better.
Yeah, there's not a lot of goalkeeper sympathizers out there either,
I know. And I still play, I play, City League, Latino League in town here, I'll always play, but I'm always the first one, and I've always been the first one to, every time the keeper, makes a save, I go there, I hug them, or if we win a game that I realized that the goalkeeper was the key player in that game, it didn't even matter who scored the goals for us to win the game, but we had, let's say we won 3-0. That could have been because of the goalkeeper. So I'm always the one, and I always wanted to talk to someone like yourself. Like you've been, through since 7 years old to high school, college soccer, to professional level, to the highest level possible. And to kind of talk and pick your brain about that stuff, to see, and you just mentioned to me that it is mostly a mental kind of game for goalkeepers. And I think for people to listen to this and kind of understand that it is like mostly like a mental game for goalkeepers, I think especially for the young athletes, that they focus maybe too much on the training side of things, which, I'm sure you're going to talk about, training methods, what's good, what's bad, what could help the young goalkeeper, more in terms of becoming a better goalkeeper, but telling them that most of this is up here is already extremely helpful.
Yeah, man, of course. And it's, these are experiences, and this is why I'm passionate about this, because, I've had my own struggles with mental health, and a lot of that came from goalkeeping. Like a lot of it came from mistakes I've made. And, I've dealt with some heavy stuff, and a lot of that had to do with goalkeeping. So it's like, it's almost my responsibility as someone that's been through a lot to let people know what they're signing up for. But in saying all of that, there are so many qualities that can come from being a goalkeeper in terms of setting yourself up for the rest of your life.
100%.
You have to be a leader to be a goalkeeper. You have to be able to hold yourself extremely accountable to be a goalkeeper. You have to be reliable. You have to work hard. Like, there's a lot of things that I don't want to scare people off of it. It's just good to be aware that, you're going to face some mental struggles, and how you handle that is going to go a long way in terms of how you are able to have success at the position. But in saying that, there's a ton of positives that come from being a goalkeeper, and not only that you take with you on the field, but you take with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So it's a unique position in the terms of what all you deal with. But if you're able to be comfortable in all of that, and there's a lot of people out there that are listening that I'm sure are extremely comfortable in all that, then you're setting yourself up in a pretty good way for a lot of tools that you're going to need later in life. So it's a combination of it, like most things are, but it's just something to definitely be aware of.
Yeah. Totally. No, this is great. This is amazing for, everyone that, they're listening, watching. I think this, from the few minutes that we've been talking, there are so many things that I'm sure they're already kind of taking notes on that will definitely help them like right now, but to kind of develop them to become even a better goalkeeper, to pursue their dreams, to maybe college soccer, professional soccer. So
good, man. That's the goal.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing all of this, because it is important. It is important because even us here as a podcast, as content creators, I'm a field player. So, and most of the people that we've had on the podcast, we mostly talk to, we have 3 pillars: mindset, strength, and nutrition. So we try to bring experts on those fields, but also former, current footballers, coaches, to kind of talk about that, be well-rounded, to give as much, reliable information as we possibly can. But like I said, we've had one goalkeeper coach, Willamette University, a shout out to them. And now you.
Yeah, integrated a little bit.
Exactly, because like I said, it's important. It's more important than what people give credits to. So I'm glad that you're here.
Hey, on behalf of the goalkeeper community, I appreciate you being a supporter.
Amazing. So let's jump into the different levels, right? Break that down for us. The young goalkeepers now, that transition from high school to college soccer, to then college soccer to the professional level.
So it's changed a lot. So I'll just say that as well. When I was growing up playing, things were very different in youth soccer. Nowadays, these kids are getting a ton of exposure to some really high quality players, right? There's the academy set up. Right now, Generation Adidas Cup is going on. They're playing against some of the biggest clubs in the world. There's a lot of exposure going on now for these kids that didn't exist back then. But the things that I will say about the transition, at least from my experiences, that I think can relate to what people are going through now, is you go from almost being, when you step onto a college campus, you're 18 years old. You think you got things figured out. You think you're a man, or you think you're developed and that you're grown. And then you're playing against 23-year-olds, 24-year-olds who are probably a little bit more grown than you are. And it's more exposure to players that are older than you, that are more physical, that play the game differently, that have been through the process of a lot of things. I'm not saying that you can't fit in, but there's a step up with that, with everything, not just on the field, but also in the locker room, right? You're an 18-year-old kid dealing with people that are grown, in some worlds, very grown adults, and you're trying to integrate into that and relate to these people, but also play against them. And then your opponents are the same way. And it was kind of similar to when you step up into the professional ranks. In the professional ranks, the one thing I'll say about college soccer that I thought was great was that was really like the last time I felt and now it's probably different with NIL, honestly. Now it's probably different with NIL, truthfully. But that was the last time I really just felt like the team was working for the common cause of helping my school win games and win a championship, right? That was the universal overlying message of what it was. And then when you get professional, things change. You're dealing with people that have families. You're dealing with people that, everybody wants to have your job when you're a professional. Like, everybody's gunning for your job. If you go down or if something happens, there's a list of 100 people that they can call that would take your job immediately. So when you step up into professional life, it just turns into more of competitive isn't the right word, but there's just a different type of energy, because everybody's trying to win games for the team, but ultimately everybody's trying to put money in their bank account, and they're trying to provide for their families, or they're trying to build their own life that exists outside of soccer. So that's a different world as opposed to, the college life where it was just, we're going to school, we're playing, we're trying to win games for the school. And if we win, great. If not, at least we're having a decent time doing it because we're all going to the same university. So for me, that was really the big difference in terms of all that stuff. And then in terms of playing, every time you step up and surround yourself with better players, everything's faster, everything's crisper. You have to be able to adjust to all of these different things that are going on. You have to get your game up to speed as fast as possible. When I first got picked up by Real Salt Lake, this is before I went to the Rowdies. I was drafted by Real Salt Lake and I was released after the first preseason camp. And I spent 3 weeks with them and knew immediately that I was in over my head. They were preparing for Champions League at the time. They were buzzing. It wasn't a normal preseason. I stepped into this group and they were getting ready to play in Champions League within a month. So I stepped into this group and within, a week, I knew that I was in way over my head and I should probably go down to the NASL to get some games and get myself a little bit more adapted to the speed.
So what was it? Just the speed? The speed of the game is just...
Speed of the game, things that I had never learned in college, things that I never really had to deal with in college were happening all around me. And they were just really dialed in and locked in. It was just... there was just really no room for a guy to bring in and trying to figure it out and give him time to grow because they were getting ready for Champions League. So I wasn't around a group that was going to award me with the time to get myself up to speed. I was around a group that was like, are you going to make this roster and help us? And the answer was very quickly no. So it was like, all right, well, you're not the guy we need right now. So I asked for my release and they released me and, I went and signed with the Rowdies. But it was very easy to identify quickly.
That's a good thing. Like your kind of common sense almost. Like you noticed that and you were aware of that difference that you needed to kind of step down for like 2 steps back for several forward later. I think that's a good recognition from you as well, because not many people have that common sense. They would be like, oh no, I'm stubborn. I'm just going to keep trying, keep doing it. And maybe, things could have gone in a different direction. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, I was lucky too, though, there's some luck involved in that. The team that I went to was in the process that they were in. And, had I gotten drafted by another team that might've been more okay with me taking time and developing, maybe that's a different path, but I was picked by that team and I was fortunate enough to know the Rowdies really well. And I always thought that if I was going to play in the NASL, which, now it's the USL and things have gotten mixed up, but that I would only play for the Rowdies because if I was going to do that, I wanted to be living at home. And I was fortunate enough that there was a spot there. And then from there, it just kind of worked out the way that it did. I think that there's always a bit of luck involved in everybody's situation. There's a lot of right place, right time, adapting to the situation in which you're in. And there's no, carbon cut. This is the right path that's going to work. Right. Mine just happened to work out the way that it did, which ultimately ended up working out for me. Right. I have good hindsight on the whole situation.
Life is insane. It's crazy. There's so many things that we could have done that could have taken us to a different path. That's insane. But going back a little bit before the pro, so you explained, which was super good. You just didn't talk about the level, the field, the speed, but that difference in age as you come in, but also the locker room, like that kind of environment as well. If a kid is locked in, right, I want to become a professional soccer player. How much like wiggle room for being a college, soccer player, but also enjoying those, 4 years as like a, 18, 20 parties and girls and how do you balance that stuff out in order to still progress and make it to the professional level?
If you're really determined and you want to be a pro, I would first off, I would question going to college now, honestly.
Interesting.
If
Unpack
there's an opportunity for you to play, if there's an opportunity for you to play for, if it's a lower division team, it might not be MLS, but if there's a professional opportunity for you to play, I would challenge you to really explore that and see if it's a situation in which you think you can get games and thrive in. Or if you do go the college route and you really want to play professionally, kind of make it known that you're not going to be there very long, or you might do 1 or 2 seasons to get that college experience, play against older players, but with the mindset of knowing that you're going to come out. I would definitely say that going the college route now in the way that things are set up, by the time you're out of college, if you're 22, 23, by the time you're out of college, and this isn't for goalkeepers. Goalkeepers are very different. I would say goalkeepers go to college, play as many games as you can, just get games. But like for players, I would challenge them to say, if you're 23, 24 and you haven't been on a roster yet, you might be getting up there a little bit in age where you might be a little bit limited in your opportunities to play professionally. But if you could be younger and that's your goal, and your goal isn't to get a college education, your goal is to play professional soccer, I would challenge you to explore those options younger rather than older. But saying that, the balance of college and being a professional, it's your first taste and step into adulthood and taking on responsibility for what's important to you. Right. I think that with everything, it's important to have balance in your life. And if you want to experience college and if you want to have those good times and make friends and go to parties, there's a time and a place to do that. It's college. Like there's always a time and a place to do that because it's always going on. But if you're really committed to being a professional, you're going to know when you should do that and when you shouldn't. And those things are going to be very obvious. And if you're somebody that doesn't have any interest in partying, then, it's a really good test for you in willpower and self-control and dedication to what you're trying to accomplish. I would definitely leaned on more of the side of someone that had balance in my life in terms of enjoying myself socially and playing professionally. But there's a time and a place for everything. And, as you get older and you're an adult and you go through maybe you make a couple of mistakes and do it at the wrong time and place, those are lessons you're either going to learn, or those are lessons that you're not going to learn and it's not going to work out for you. So it's a delicate balance, but I think, again, like who you are as a person, you need to be aware of, what your goals are, how you can accomplish those goals. And if you feel like you can mix in a good time in there and still accomplish your goals.
Yeah. Self-awareness. Yeah, no, that's great. You mentioned something there in terms of, if you're a field player, I will challenge you to do, not the college route. But if you're a goalkeeper, I recommend you going through college soccer. Why?
When you think about goalkeeping, I was mentally prepared to play goalkeeper at the best point of my life when I got hurt that led to my retirement. And I was 33 years old. So you think about goalkeeping in the standpoint of, the more experience that you get, the more you've been through on the field. If your body can hold up, that's when you're at your best, because you've seen everything and you've dealt with so many different in-game situations that you have so much experience to lean on that experience is going to carry you a really far way. I mean, think about the professional game and the goalkeepers that manage to stay healthy. The goalkeepers that manage to stay healthy, you have guys that are playing mid to late 30s consistently. Yeah. And they're always playing at a high level because they're healthy. Their body stayed intact. They're healthy, but they've been through so much experience that they see the game slower. Everything comes to them much easier than it would for a younger player. And the same thing can be said with young players with goalkeeping in terms of college versus going pro. If you're a younger goalkeeper and you're 18, 19, and you go to a pro team and you sit on the bench for 6 years because there's guys that are older than you and all you're doing is practicing, you're missing an entire window where you can get tons of experience. But if you go to college and you're getting 20, 25 games for 3 to 4 years every single year against players that are older than you, that's experience that you're never going to get back. So that would be why, because I think that the in-game experience for goalkeepers goes such a long way that if your options are to sit on a professional bench or go get meaningful college games, then go get your college games. And there's always a time and place for everything, right? Like this, it's not just like a landscape answer. If you're a kid that's really good and you do 2 years of college and you're like, all right, I am so far above this, I'm ready to go compete professionally, go. You know what I mean? Like that answer will come to you.
Right.
But if you're 18 and you're not getting games and there's no plan for you to get games with your pro team, whether it's loaning you out or doing something different, go to college, enjoy it, be around that, take that first step into adulthood and self-independence, get your games, and then, let it evolve from there. That'd be my advice in terms of goalkeeping.
Great. No, great. That totally makes sense. Yeah. I just wanted to break that down because I wanted you to break that down because you mentioned the field player versus the goalkeeper, kind of that two paths that you could take on. Yeah. So okay. So you're now at the professional level. So after Rio Salt Lake, you don't go straight to the Portland Timbers, correct?
Well, there was like a few days where I was on Minnesota, but it wasn't long.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a funny story. So we had just had my daughter. So we were in Salt Lake and I was begging the GM to get me out of there. The last 2 years, I was begging him. I'm like, man, I'm playing behind Nick Raimondo. I'm never going to play. I need to get on with my life. Like, I can't just sit here and be the backup waiting for this guy to retire. Cause they're like, you're going to be next. And I'm like, he's going to play till he's 50. Like, I can't sit here anymore. And then, so I'm begging the GM to let me go. And then finally, at the end of the 2016 season, he calls me into his office and he's like, hey, there's a loophole or there's like a situation with the protection list where we have to protect X amount of international players, even if we're not going to re-sign them. So that means that we can't protect you. And he's like, so you're going to be unprotected in this expansion draft. And I'm not telling you to do anything specific, but he's like, if I was you and I wanted to leave the team, I would call my agent and tell him to get to work. So, immediately call my agent and I'm like, hey, this is happening. This is our chance. Like, I got to go. I got to get out of here. So they worked out a deal where Minnesota was one of the expansion teams that year. Minnesota was going to take me in the draft and then trade me to Portland for a player that Portland had the rights to. And we had just had my daughter in Salt Lake, and and then immediately it's like, hey, we're gonna get traded. We had a house, we just had our daughter, and it's like, hey, all right, we're gonna get traded now, of course. And then so I get traded, but nobody talks to me. And then the Minnesota owner texts me and is like, hey, excited to have you on the Loons.
And you had no idea.
Wait a second. I'm like, I was supposed to get traded to Portland like immediately. I was like, what's going on here? And no one's talking to me. And my agent's like, yeah, there was some holdup in the negotiations, but like it should all be okay. And then, a few days go by, and then finally it's like, all right, it went through, but nobody was talking to me. So I'm like, is this going down or not? Like, I need to know where I'm going to move my family. But then it went through, and then that's how I ended up in Portland.
Wow. That's so interesting. Just the fact that you're not kind of like aware of that, like what was going on, that must be kind of scary in a way, especially because you just had the daughter kind of settled in Salt Lake. So yeah.
Wow. It was the first time. It was the first time where it was kind of like the first time where it's kind of like, all right, yeah, I'm just I'm a bargaining tool.
Oh God. So, okay. You arrive in Portland, Oregon, moved the whole family, and tell us, what was it like?
So when I got the phone call about being traded, the question was, my agent asked me before all this started, said, hey, would you want to play for Portland? And it's funny because, my family doesn't have a professional sports background. My in-laws are sports fans, but they're not soccer fans. And I was always telling my in-laws, if you want to fall in love with soccer, and this is when I was on Salt Lake, I said, if you want to fall in love with soccer, come to Portland, Oregon, and watch us play a game. And this is when I was on Salt Lake, encouraging them to come to an away game in Portland to see what it's all about.
100%.
So when I got the phone call that was like, hey, would you be willing to get traded to Portland? It was an immediate, this is the best possible situation that I could ever be in. This is the only team that I would want to play for. This is like the mecca of what I think being a professional soccer player should look like.
100%.
So my enthusiasm was, through the roof. And then, so we move out there, and it's scary and it's a new experience. We just had a daughter. We're from Tampa. My wife moved, all the way to Portland, Oregon. We're from Florida. All of our family's back in Florida. But it just slowly became a place that we loved and we were really comfortable in. And, a lot of that had to do with the soccer experience, but a lot of that had to do with the club too. The club always looked out for us and they made sure that we were taken care of. And it was just kind of the right mix of feeling like a professional athlete, but in a respectable way that, that everyone's going to be okay at the end of the day. But it was that cool balance of actually feeling like you're a pro athlete and feeling like a big deal in a town that really cared about it. And it was a cool way to see a part of the world that I probably would have never seen had I not been traded there,
100%. Yeah, no, it is. You nailed that one. The fans, like going to watch a game at that stadium, it is an experience.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really said this publicly, but there were multiple times in my career that I probably should have left Portland. Like if I was ambitious and reading the writing on the wall, I would have been pretty aggressive in trying to get out of Portland, but I couldn't. I got a taste of what it was like to be the starting goalkeeper for the Portland Timbers, and that was like, why would I want anything else? That was like the job for me. That was the job in Major League Soccer, that if I'm going to do this is the only place I want to do it, because this is what it's all about. And, to be honest, it ended up hurting my career towards the end because I should have gotten out, but I just knew what it meant to be the starting goalie. And like, it's kind of like, once I got a taste of it, that's all I wanted.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, that's amazing. And thanks for sharing that. You've never said that publicly, so that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm a little more. I could be a little bit more of an open book now that I'm 4 years out of it. 4 years retired.
You mentioned agent. When does that come to place? When do you realize that you do need an agent?
So I started talking to agents when it was clear that I was going to be a pro. And I would say that they're good just to be somebody that has all the connections and the resources. And they're somebody that can knock on a lot of doors for you. But if you're going through the process of hiring an agent, I would just be very mindful of vetting out the process to its entirety and really landing on if you're a parent listening to this or if you're a player listening to this, really landing on a personality that you want working for you. Does that make sense? So for me, the first agency that I went with ultimately wasn't a good fit because I was a person that didn't necessarily get a ton of individual attention. I didn't really know what was happening all the time. It was a really big organization and they had tons of players, and there was more of, they get phone calls from teams that are looking for players. They put the players out and say, these are the players that we have, which one of these interests you? And that was the way that they went about their business, which is fine. And if you're good with that, then that's cool. But I learned that wasn't my level of comfort and what I wanted from an agent. So then I ultimately ended up with a person who gave me more personal attention and, really took time to explain things to me and answered my phone calls. And, we were in constant communication through the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. And I learned that for me as a person, maybe I left some money on the table, but he understood that security for my family and having assurances was the most important thing for me. So he worked for me and he handled me the way that I needed to be handled. So I think for every individual, it's really vetting out the type of person you want working for you, what's the most important thing for you, and learning what that agent's goals are as an agent as well to make sure that all those things are in line.
Yeah. It just sounded like that first big company that you had kind of treated you not so much as like a human being, almost more like a product on their shelf. And just
felt like they were busy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want an agent that feels like they're too busy to handle me.
Right.
Right. And you get a lot of lip service. You get a lot of lip service from a lot of people when they're going through the agency. You're the man. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to get you all to these different places. And then once you sign on the dotted line, that relationship can change. So, I would do the research in terms of talking to people that have worked with certain agents. I would do the research in terms of figuring out, who's on this agent's list. Because especially if you're a goalkeeper and you're working with an agent that has 20 goalkeepers, who's he going to put where? That's a tough thing as well. So just a lot of information, and as much research as you can. And then ultimately, if you're trying to be a professional and sign a professional contract, an agent is the person that's going to help you with that.
That's awesome. That's great. So we talked about, you coming up, high school, college, professional level. Is there anything you want to touch on regarding your professional playing time with Portland Timbers? Because I do want you to explain, because you do have an academy, right? And a goalkeeper academy now, right?
Yeah. So I work with a couple of different organizations that the focal point is like really trying to be a resource for goalkeepers. So I can shout those out if that's cool. Or
totally. No, feel free to do that, because I want to learn like your philosophy when it comes to, you mentioned about how important the mental side of the game is for goalkeepers, right? But I do want you to break down in terms of strength and conditioning, a goalkeeper specific training, nutrition, sleep. Like, how much do you account for when it comes to those things for a goalkeeper?
I think it all kind of works together, right? So I think that in terms of training, actual goalkeeper training, physical strength, the things, plyometrics, footwork, explosiveness, those are really going to be, and getting good upper body strength too, so that your body can take the impact of constantly hitting the ground, flexibility, pliability, all the things that you think about when you're dealing with, what in terms of the position requires. You don't need to do long distance running. You're not probably going to do that, but just position specific training in terms of plyometrics, getting your body prepared for impact with strength training, those are things that'll go a long way. And in terms of actual goalkeeper training, it's a huge part of it. It's a massive part of it, because you have to learn your foundation. You have to learn, the different scenarios that you might face in a game. And one of the biggest problems around the country is there's not enough resources for goalkeepers, because, a club may have 50 goalkeepers in their club. If they have 2 goalie coaches, it's tough. It's tough to get that individualized focus. So honestly, I would look at the internet as a resource to look at different drills, to look at different things that you can be doing on your own. It's not really a position where being by yourself is the most beneficial, but there's certainly things that you can do, whether it's footwork or diving techniques or working on different positioning and things like that. But having a goalie coach that's going to help guide you in trainings is, it's an important thing. And unfortunately, it's something that doesn't exist everywhere across the country, which is, kind of what our mission is. Myself and some of these organizations I'm working with, that's kind of what our mission is to try to provide more resources for the goalkeepers. But, those types of trainings, that physical training, those are all huge aspects of it. And the way that I try to model my trainings and the things that we do is, say you have 20 goalies at a training, which is way too many, but like, say you have 20 goalies at one training.
And one coach.
Right. And one coach.
Okay.
Try to think about how much the things that you are going through in training implement to the game, right? If I'm playing in a soccer game and I face one shot in 90 minutes, that's a lot of time without doing much. But I have to stay extremely focused throughout the entirety of that game, because you never know when it's going to come, right? So like one of the focal points that I'll take to other organizations, or, I do some consulting work for clubs as well in terms of trying to help them build the goalkeeper community a little bit better. One of the things that I'll take to those organizations is challenge the goalkeepers that if you get 30 minutes of goalkeeper training a week, how can you maximize that 30 minutes and make it as game realistic as possible, right? Like, so from a mental side of things, if you get 10 reps in that 30 minutes, what are you doing during the other time to stay sharp and stay focused on the training so that you can maximize the time when it's your call to action? Because that's what a game is.
100%.
You know what I mean? So like, there's different things that you can try and implement into a training system within what's already being built without necessarily having the right resources. And for me, that's really where, I try to focus on. It's, the training side. There are a lot of good goalkeeper trainers out there. A lot of people can train goalies. You can look at YouTube and train a goalie probably and get the job done enough where they get those reps in. but it's that extra level of, hey, how can I apply this to when it actually matters the most? How can I maximize each time I get the chance to do this? That's where I'm really, heavily focused on.
That's, like from everything that you just told us right now, I kept thinking about when you first mentioned how important the mental side is. Because it really is, because you just broke that down like in a game, right? You're most, let's say if there's just one shot in a 90-minute game, you're mostly just, there. But it's still like it goes back to that mental side of the game, to always staying sharp and focused during, that phase that you're just there kind of waiting for things to happen. Yeah, so it really is. It's the foundation of basically goalkeeping is how sharp can you be up here? And then, you do want to have the specific training. You do want to have the strength and conditioning, have your nutrition on point, make sure that you're getting enough sleep every night. But yeah, it's just amazing that I've never thought about how much mental it is.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I was really lucky, man. So I had a goalkeeper coach that actually played for the Rowdies, back in the day. And I got introduced to him when I was 10. And he started introducing all this to me. And, he was the one that really dove in about the mental side of things and making sure you're mentally sharp. And, he was a mentor through and through. I was calling him when I was playing for the Timbers. And, I was really fortunate that I had a coach that taught me these things. And now it's, that's what I'm trying to do, is pay it forward and try to teach as many people as I can, because there's not a lot of people out there that, have had the experience that are working with people. So
yeah, this is extremely important. You see, like, because I had never thought about it that way, because because if you're just there, not paying attention, you're not focused, that one chance that you had to either save the game or fail. And like you said, I was just thinking about losing the game, and then you actually went deeper, losing the job.
Well, it's a very cutthroat. I mean, it's just a position where once you get it, getting it, you think getting it's the hardest part. Hanging on to it's the hardest part.
That was the follow-up question I was going to have for you.
Like,
what's been
everybody wants to be the starter. And when you're the starter, whether you have good teammates or not, and listen, I was a great teammate, whether I was starting, second string, third string, whatever. But I always knew that, if this guy that I like him, good guy, good teammate, like being his friend. But if he gives me an opportunity to take his job, I'm going to take it, and I'm going to try not to give it up. And, so it's a position where if you're the starter, everybody wants your job. And, not that people are rooting for you to fail, but that if failure is something that happens, there's a lot of willing participants. You know what I mean?
100%. And especially like you mentioned, the different, levels, right? At the pro level now, that's your full-time job. You said, like, now you're feeding your family through that job. So it's a cutthroat, but that was going to be the follow-up question, is like, what has been the hardest part of being a goalkeeper? And you basically just answered that. It's okay, you want to make it, but once you get that starting position, it's how can you keep it?
Yeah, and to be fair, like, it's a different process, right? So, and that was kind of what did me in. I'll bring you back all around to what we talked about earlier in the conversation. Was once I got the starting job in Portland, we made MLS Cup. I had a great season. I finally had reached that peak where people were like, "Oh yeah, Jeff's the man. Jeff's really good, and he's a high level starter in Major League Soccer." Once that hit, I didn't really have a chip on my shoulder. What was the chip on my shoulder at that point? It was like, if I had found one, I was manifesting it, and it wasn't something that I actually believed in. So I didn't necessarily do a great job of refinding the thing that was going to drive me once I got to the top, if that makes sense. So if that is your motivation, or if there is something that, I would find a couple different things to motivate you. Because you know what I mean? Once I lost that, I don't know that I took my foot off the brakes, if I took my foot off the gas, because I was still playing at a high level. But then, I started getting switched in and out to be the starter or the bench player, and the coach wasn't communicating with me properly because not everybody cares about how they communicate with a goalkeeper. And you know what I mean? So you go down this long list, and then it, ultimately was something that affected me for a while. And that's part of the mental side. And that's somebody that, I was at the highest of highs when we made MLS Cup. And then,
How do you stay motivated?
5 months later, I was at one of my lowest of lows. So, I mean, it's just having the mental capacity to stay steady.
Yep.
And everything going on is a huge part of it.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because I just literally, like yesterday, I was listening to it's like a compilation of interviews talking like players that have played with Cristiano Ronaldo, and they all had that one same thing in common in what they told the interviewer, is that it never mattered. I mean, up to this day, he's still playing. Like okay, let's say there's a Champions League for them to win. He would prepare himself, train as much as possible, do everything right in order to achieve that goal. The next day, he was already there in training, the first one there, as if nothing had happened, focused on the next one.
Yeah.
And every time he accomplished the goal, it didn't matter. He celebrated, he enjoyed for that period, like short period of time. Next day, he was back to 0. I need to achieve more and more and more and more. And, he's almost at, reaching 1,000 goals at this point. But I think that's not an easy thing to do, because like we don't see many players doing that, many goalkeepers doing that either.
Yeah, that's why he's still around. That's why he's still one of the best. I mean, that type of mentality takes you a really long way. And for his teammates to be shouting it out too, should hammer down how unique that is,
100%. Yeah, a bunch of them, and legends too, like Kaká, like Marcelo, and it's a 15-minute interview of compilations of each player saying the same exact thing about Cristiano Ronaldo, like the difference between him and other players. So I thought, and when you brought that up, it's like, okay, you achieved this, but then how can you, like you said, maintain and keep that same drive in order to keep pushing yourself, even if you're at the highest, level. It's and again, I'm gonna remember this forever. It's the mental. It goes back to being, strong.
That's not a game, man.
100%. So yeah. So do you want to shout out the organizations that you've been working on? Your
Oh yeah, sure, man. Thank you. So for goalkeeping, I just started working with a company called Keeper Wars Inc. And if you're a goalkeeper, you know what I'm talking about. Keeper Wars is a fun game where goalkeepers put the goals, X amount of yards apart. You could shoot, you could punt, you could throw the ball. But more importantly, I head up kind of the goalkeeper education aspect of that. And I run the clinics, and, I'm just kind of a resource to the families that are involved in that. So if you're a goalkeeper that's listening, you want to have some fun, it's like legitimate fun. It's the most fun thing that goalkeepers get to do, because we don't get to do a lot of things that are fun. Then Goalkeeper Wars Inc. or Keeper Wars Inc. Check us out. Really good time trying to build the goalkeeper community there. And then if you're in the Tampa Bay area, or if you just want to follow along, I'm always doing goalkeeper film sessions, different things to provide goalkeeper resources on my personal and on Tampa Bay Goalkeeper Academy Instagram. So feel free to check those out as well.
Awesome. Jeff, is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't discussed?
Yeah, I feel like we touched on a lot. Just stay in the fight. If you're a goalkeeper and you love doing it, longevity is something that goes a long way. And, you're going to deal with frustrating times. There's going to be things that are going to make you feel like you don't want to do it anymore. But if you really love the position and you love making the big saves that bail your team out, because that's why we do it, right? We like to make those big saves that ultimately help the team win. That's why we do it. That's why we love it. Stay in the fight. That's all. Just stay in the fight.
Before we close this all up, just to kind of circle back to kind of close that journey from 7 years old to the professional level with Portland Timbers, when did you realize that it was ready for you to retire?
So I was teetering on retirement after 2020. So the COVID the COVID year really made me reevaluate a lot of things in life and decide, do I want to be closer to my family? Is it time to move on and start the next chapter of my life? And so that really made me start evaluating things, and I was going to let it play out a little bit and see how the next season went in terms of my status or, what was kind of happening at the time. And so I won the starting job back. The keepers got a couple injuries. I won the starting job back, and I was playing at a really high level. Like, I felt like I was playing some of the best soccer I'd ever played. And then I got injured. And I got injured in 2019. I had to get my shoulder completely repaired.
Really?
So that was a year-long injury. And then it went into COVID. And then COVID obviously is its own animal. And then the next year I blew a tendon called my rectus femoris. It attaches your quad to your hip.
Yep.
And I blew that, and that was a season-ending injury. And then once that happened, it was just kind of like, all right, well, my body told me what my decision should be. I didn't really feel like going through the rehab process again. I checked out, honestly. Like, once I got injured again, I didn't have it in me to rehab and try to restart the process over again. And I just kind of took that as a sign that it was time to go.
Hey, 11 years though. Beautiful career. Extensive career. Solid.
If I could have stayed healthy, I would have played a lot longer, but the injury grind is its own different animal.
Yeah. No, I mean, amazing career. Injuries do happen, unfortunately, but yeah, you lasted for a long time, so
appreciate that, man.
Thank
you.
So this is great. So we asked this question to every guest on the podcast. Tell us a game changer moment in your life and why.
Got a few. Let me think. Let me see what route I want to take this.
Yeah, you can go many routes, having a family, a daughter.
Can go many routes. So this would be a good lesson. So when we were playing Seattle away in the playoffs 2018, if we drew 0-0, we would have gone through. And then if we drew at any other score, then we would have gone to overtime. And if we lost, we would have got knocked out. If we won, we would have got knocked out. So it's the second leg of Seattle. About 65th minute, I come out for a cross. I make a good play on it, but my timing was a little bit off, and I end up dropping the cross, and then they score. So then we're down 1-0. And this is the second round of the playoffs. Portland, Seattle, biggest rivalry, known in MLS at the time.
And you needed just to tie.
We're down. All we had to do was tie 0-0, but then we're down 1-0. So then, things get crazy. And so I make that mistake, and I'm wearing it. You know what I mean? Like, it hurts when I'm going through it, but it's like, all right, you got to get over it. But, it hurts. You need the team to score a goal. And then we scored a goal, and then it ended up being 2-2. It just got crazy. The game got absolutely crazy. Like, the game goes to overtime. It was just a wild back and forth after that had happened. And then we go into penalties, and I ended up saving a penalty and helping the team win. So that was the moment where it was like, all right, you made this mistake on a huge scale, but the team had your back. The team dug you out of the hole, did what they needed to do to score goals and help you recover from that mistake. And then I had the mental strength to be able to do something in penalty kicks and help the team win. So it's just kind of, a cool full circle of, what I always teach about trying to put it in the back of your head and keep playing and, worrying about the next save. It's always about the next save. It's not about the thing you just did. And then, having that ultimately come back to me on a really big scale was pretty cool.
Amazing. How crazy it is from going, to the lowest to then to saving
the wild ride.
Yeah.
Wild ride.
Yeah.
Crazier for my family, I think, than it would be.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, that's great. Jeff, where can people find you?
Yeah, at Jeff_Attinella1. I do most of the stuff on Instagram. That's a good spot. Tampa Bay GKA on Instagram as well. You can find me there. And then just one more time, if you're a goalkeeper, Keeper Wars Inc., I'm working with them as well. They're a really fun company, so you should check them out.
Awesome. So, hey, thank you so much for hopping on this here. I'm sure, all the goalkeepers, all the parents, and even, players, they got so much value from our conversation, everything that you had to share. So I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Good times.